virtual team or not. So, you've probably all worked in a virtual team of some description, whether knowingly or unknowingly, in one of these formats, which are pretty much everywhere today. I think you'd probably have to try harder not to work in some form of virtual team than to work in a virtual team. All of my students tend to be doing it in the likes of Facebook and Skype, and the majority of my meetings and my virtual team sort of endeavours have been conducted with the use of Facebook to set up groups, project groups, so that everybody gets notified of the same thing at the same time. The majority of our meetings are through Skype, which we'll go in through later. And all of the files are either sent through, you send it for the larger files, or we use a shared Dropbox for most of it. And you sort of think, well, maybe there should be more to virtual teams, and maybe, I thought he was going to tell me something I didn't know. But in reality, all of the tools are around us all the time. And it just depends how you work on them as a professional team, to be honest. So, a few introductory statements on virtual teams. Now, a virtual team or geographically dispersed team, for the sort of Americans and other people who overuse acronyms, that's GDT, can be defined, as is by Powell and Pickley and Ives, as groups of geographically, organisationally and or time dispersed workers brought together by information and telecommunication technologies to accomplish one or more organisational skills. Now, tasks. And this isn't anything, I'm not telling you anything new here. It's the same way that you work with your teams on a daily basis in your offices, the only difference being, as the definition states, you're geographically dispersed and your only form of communication is through Skype or other social media. And like we'll get to in a moment, that can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing, and it really makes you reflect on yourself as a person and as a member of a professional team, what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. So, a few questions that we're going to address, which is, what are the issues when working in a virtual team? Are virtual teams as productive as physical teams? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of virtual teams? These are some important factors that were outlined by Powell, Pickley and Ives and other researchers in the area, all contributing to the success of virtual teams. Once again, nothing you won't have seen for normal team working scenarios. There's slightly more emphasis placed on trust in a virtual team, because you often find yourself, as we'll talk about in a moment, kind of having to do trust by proxy. Okay, if somebody's on the team, you trust that they have the skills to be on the team and are professional enough to deliver the job that they're meant to deliver. Not unlike the real world, however, you've never met that person before and you're going off the fact that they've been introduced as an industry expert to the project. So, we'll start with leadership. Now, I'll say probably, but it's definitely one of the most vital aspects to a successful team, whether it be virtual or not. And that's because leaders can help foster the relationship when building a team and just general team building tasks, providing continuous feedback and listening to team members and sorting out those sort of little issues that arise between various team members at any one time, the disputes, where to head with the project, where we're going with the project. And I, put on the bottom here, in my personal experience, identifying and delegating tasks in order for the team to maintain its focus is incredibly important also. Probably one of the main things about a successful virtual team is the continuing reiteration of the focus of the team. The project that I was involved with, which was to design a park for a curricular project that was also going to run alongside it in the US. Now, it was absurd, in my opinion, in the beginning, because I'm in Newcastle, I'm not in the US, and I've only seen photographs of this park. However, when you're sort of called upon to be part of the project, you sort of think, well, look, I'll give it my best shot, but you not want to get somebody local in to do it. It kind of makes more sense. And we worked on this project together, and there was a chap involved in the project from Scotland as well, a Canadian chap, and then 2 people in America who were delivering the project. Now, the project went okay in the beginning. However, after a little while, people in the team start to lose focus. When you've got a virtual team and you're not, you don't have to be there all of the time, and people aren't watching you, you're not working in the same environment as people, it's incredibly important to develop a very, very stringent brief about the project and the outputs of the project before you actually kick off. Just because all the way through that project, once you've logged off Skype, it's almost like that's the end of your day as far as that project goes. When you're at work, you're in work for the entire day, and it's always reiterated to you that you should be getting on with work. When you're in a virtual team, as soon as the Skype phone call ends and you find yourself sat in a shirt and tie and a pair of pajama bottoms on the bottom half of you, and you think, well, you know, I don't have to carry on with that now. They're all, you know, he's in Canada, he's in America. I'll do it tomorrow. Okay, it doesn't, and that trap of complacency is so much more tempting when working in a virtual team. So reiterating the focus of the output every single meeting, at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting, is so much more important when working in a virtual team.
Can you give an example of that?
What, as far as, so we were developing a brief to do this.
Would you like to come in to start the meeting? Would you like just reiterate the minutes of the last meeting?
Well, when we were working together, I mean, an example where it sort of went wrong is the fact that we were all designated tasks to do the team. You know, one of us would design the material choices, another would design or look at the actual design of a sculpture. And it was apparent from the start that somebody had tried to define tasks, but those tasks weren't defined strictly enough. Okay, so I think it's even more important when you're not sitting next to somebody and I can go, look, I've got this material, what are you using? And you know, you tell me, and then we'd be able to get on and I'd know. In a virtual team, we sort of came back the next meeting, I'd done something completely different from the other guy who was designing the sculpture. He'd made a lot of pre-assumptions about where he could put his sculpture, in, you know, compared to the layout of the park which I was designing, and it just created so much friction in so many areas, because you go, well, all right, I'll change that. And you go, oh no, don't worry about changing it. And you know, then the little niggles of a team start to come at you, because he spent a week by himself working on this, and it's obviously quite close to his heart, and you spent a week by yourself working on it, and you just think, well, why should I change it? You know, he never told me about that. And these things that usually come out in the wash when you, in your day-to-day work life, by just saying, oh, you know, are you using gravel, mate, or are you, you know, what's your sculpture made out of? What's the plan of the size of the sculpture? Everything needs to be pinned down so much sooner in a virtual project. So at the start of the meeting, we'd once we've got a handle on it, we'd recap very, very sort of precisely what was talked about at the last meeting, what was expected, in the form of an agenda, really. Sort of like, you know, today Ollie's going to discuss the material choice and the layout in detail, and how it would affect Ian's sculpture situation, because he's been working on that for the last week. And then it's almost like trying to make people feel guilty, and by your choice of word and your choice of language in the Skype call, and reaffirming the tasks, because you can't take anything for granted like you would usually in a team where, oh, he's just getting on with his job and he's doing a good job. And then at the end of the meeting, we'd always be like, right, so next meeting, you're going to work very closely with Ian over the next week. Because what we found was that we'd have scheduled Skype meetings set up, but in between the Skype meetings, there'd be absolutely no intergroup communication. Okay? That kind of leads me on to the next. The focus bit is the fact that, you know, outlining all of the outputs, outlining what you want to produce, and sticking to that. Because another thing is, like, I was guilty of it. I'd go off and I'd think, oh, that's really interesting. And I'd spend like 3 days looking at something that had absolutely no relevance to the project whatsoever. And then, just because I found it interesting, doesn't mean that everybody else in the group was going to agree with me. So the focus of your outputs and the focus of the tasks that you're on is something that really needs to just be drummed home, like the entire time you're working on a virtual team project. And then, like we said, sort of communication. And aside from Facetime and trust issues, which we'll move on to, these are some of the things that I'd like to consider, which are possible issues with virtual team communication. Now, these are questions, you know, that I want you guys to think about as well in your own mind. Which the first one being status differences. It should be an equalizer, the virtual team, because everybody's on the same sort of level playing field. You know, you're not going to your manager's office. You know, you don't have a supervisor per se. But then, people often say that it's more democratic, but you know, is it more democratic? And this is the part of the communication bit that I want to get to, which is that sometimes, depending on the kind of person you are, you work well in virtual teams, or you have to learn to work well in virtual teams. Because I do a decent job here, you know, I do a good job here, but in a virtual team, in real life, I like to get a project and just get it done and finish it. When you're working in a virtual team, it's like one of those work days where you go to work and you just have 5 meetings, and then you have another 5 meetings about the 5 meetings. Okay, so you and if you don't know what I mean, basically, you spend most of your time talking about the things that you're going to do, when in reality all you want to do is get on and do the things that you need to do. And I found myself sort of thinking, I haven't got time for a Skype call, I know what my job is, I've got to get on with it, I'll do this in the beginning. And what you'll find is there's people who love to talk about doing stuff. Whether they do it or not is an entirely different matter, but there's people in virtual teams and in normal teams who are pervasive on Facebook. You know, you'll ask for some elements, you'll ask for some bits and pieces of the project, maybe the plans, or could you upload some inspiration, could you show me some documents about where you're coming from? And these people have no concept about refining information. So you'll suddenly find that you've got 27 updates on Facebook because they've uploaded every single plan and sketch that they've ever drawn since the beginning of the project. And you just think, you know, we don't need this. And they're the kind of people as well in the Skype meetings who tend to be there and just be talking the entire time. And it depends, you know, people who have quite a shy personality often find it in the beginning quite difficult to work in virtual teams, because yes, it is a level playing field, but when you're on that Skype call, especially if it's not a video Skype call, you've got to chip in. There's no round table, so there's never going to be the opportunity in that virtual team or the team scenario where everyone's going to stop talking and they're going to look at you. Okay, so if you don't speak up and speak out, then your ideas just get washed over, and the only thing that gets recorded is the guy that's talking non-stop all the time, and the project often gets led in his direction, which takes us back to focus, and that's why it's another reason to have all of these outputs and the products of the meeting and what you want to achieve really outlined quite clearly, so that if somebody is pushing the project in a way that the team doesn't like, or you don't like personally, you can always refer back to this brief document and these outlined tasks that you're going to produce things, and say, look, we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be wasting time on this, it's not in the brief. And you find yourself having to come to these situations accelerate a lot faster in virtual teams, because you're away working, you're with your own thoughts, and then all of a sudden you're on a Skype call for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and it all comes out in the wash in those 2 hours. Another thing is de-individuation, which is a psychological term referring to the loss of self-awareness and evaluation by feeling anonymous. This can be positive or negative in a virtual team, because people who are usually shy, because they can't be seen, are a lot more willing to speak out. I think really the most important thing is, if you're leading a virtual team on a virtual team call, to get over all of these aspects and these problems with teamwork and communication, is just to keep a real tight agenda going with the virtual team. Sometimes people will treat it like a phone call, people will treat it like a catch-up, We found the best thing to do, to be honest, was to log in to the virtual call. So as if it were a normal meeting, you'd say, well, look, we'll be online from 6:30, the Skype call starts at 7, or the meeting starts at 7. So we say log in at 6:30, the meeting starts at 7, because inevitably everybody gets online at 7, and you start talking about, do you have a good weekend, you know, what you've been doing, what's the weather like in Canada, you know, is it still freezing in Russia, you know, like all that sort of stuff. So if you log in, if you set a time, probably half an hour beforehand, where you can get all that chit chat away. If you're not the kind of person who likes chit chat, just come at 7, all right? But that little half hour is very good for cutting waste out of the meeting. And then conformity, you know, it's believed that there's less pressure to conform in virtual groups, but I would definitely question this, because if you're on a Skype call, and it's a video Skype call, you just need to concentrate so much more, because I've been sat at my desk listening to people tell me about something that I thought was completely ridiculous, and you just find your face giving yourself away, like massively. You just sort of sat there, you're like, and you know, you don't say anything, but you forget that everybody can see you in that Skype meeting, and then you'll suddenly find, you know, Greg from Canada going, is that all right, Ollie? And you're like, oh yeah, of course that's all right, that's fine, don't worry about that, I'm all right with that. Being English and not wanting to sort of say, actually, I think you're an idiot. But, you know, that's the sort of thing that you've really got to be careful of. That miscommunication, don't let your face give you away. But at the same time, your face is a brilliant tool at this, and is probably one of the most important ones. Because you need to build up that FaceTime, you need to build up the trust. Completely different from talking to somebody on the phone every day. You trust somebody implicitly just so much more when you can see them. When you can, you know, you make a much better judgment of somebody as a character when you have that FaceTime with them. You know, miscommunication as well, noted by Kruger, is that we've all done this probably, that email readers cannot tell if a writer is attempting to be sarcastic or funny. And this works in virtual teams not because we're writing, but because we're all from completely different areas of the world. And what we find funny because we're dry and sarcastic, people in America 100% don't get. You know, I rang my colleague in America when I first started working with her at about 5 o'clock our time or whatever. It was about 4 in the morning at her time. You know, she picks the phone up and I thought, oh gosh, she sounds really tired. And she's like, Oliver, it's 4 in the morning, and I had no idea what to say. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then she kind of hung on the phone, so you sort of like, well, what do I say now? So I was just like, oh, so what are you wearing? Like, just completely joking, right? Like, completely a joke. And like, had a little laugh, and you know, and I was thinking, I chuckled to myself. I don't think she found it that funny. You know, I think she just thought I rang her at 4 in the morning to ask her what she was wearing. Right? So, you know, it's that sort of sense of humour that, like, genuinely, we all talk about it as different nations, but it really doesn't translate. Unless you want to spend like 10 minutes explaining the joke to somebody. Luckily, she had quite a good sense of humour, and she thought that, you know, she understood, but it can be a bit of a minefield. So just carrying on with communication, it is one of the most crucial things in virtual teams. And it's really down to the person putting the team together to select excellent communicators. You know, if there's somebody in your office or somebody in your team that is a better communicator with people, you know, give the job to them. People who are very good communicators tend to prefer to be the communicator. So, you know, use people in your team with those sort of strengths. And something you can rely on, or at least you should be able to rely on in the projects I've been involved with, you're always getting somebody who's kind of at the top of the game, because that's the whole point really in a virtual team, is that if you don't have the expertise, you go and find the expertise. So that takes us on to another thing later on in the trust, in the fact that, you know, the trust by proxy. We trust that the people appointed to this virtual team are all experts, okay, all experts in their field. The FaceTime, now, shouldn't really just be glossed over. Studies conducted by Kirkman found empirically that having more face-to-face meetings improved and empowered virtual teams. And this goes back to the whole trust issue and whether you feel somebody's telling the truth. You know, we use a lot of sort of little techniques in our day-to-day lives when we're talking to people at work. And, you know, it's different from being on the phone. You know, someone rings you up and says, oh, have you got that document? Oh, yeah, no worries, mate, definitely, I'll send it to you. And then you just go and get on with your normal day. If somebody's looking at you in the face and saying, no, have you done the work? And you're like, yeah, you haven't, have you? Not yet. You know, it's much easier to sort of build that very, very quick rapport and quick trust with somebody when you can see them face to face. And it's so important in a virtual team. So, I think that's all we need to say about Facetime.
Have you been called out?
Oh, lots of times. Oh yeah, I mean, not on the work front, but on the, like, my face giving me away. And to be honest, I'm quite straight shooting. I'll literally just say, you know, I'll not be like, oh, that's a really good idea. I'll be like, well, I see where you're coming from. However, you know, and then just sort of say,
the internet link out and just.
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually, because there are people that I've worked with on virtual teams who, you know, it becomes a device, really, whether do you do Facetime, do you not do Facetime? When do you pull the plug of the meeting, you know? Can you be bothered? You know, there's people who have been involved with the projects in the past who I knew was slightly technophobe about this whole thing, and they're just like, you know, we needed their input, but they were even more extreme in their views that I have, which is, just give me the job, let me do it, and I'll give it to you at the end. To the point where they'd have Skype meetings, and they're just the kind of personality that doesn't like to just sit and talk about things in meetings all the time. So it's not a bad thing, you know. In the real world, we'd just see these people as doers and people who get on with it. But it can become quite annoying in a virtual team if somebody's constantly just ringing up on the phone and saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna sign in via voice because just can't get my webcam working." Mate, you don't even sound convincing enough to lie, you know. So, and then like halfway through, they'll just go. And you'll get an email like instantly saying, "Oh, my connection's just dropped." You're like, "Well, it's not, has it? Because you're on your email." You know? So, you know, you do get a little bit of sort of toing and throwing, but I think that depends on your choice of team members in a virtual team, to be honest. I mean, the trust issue, like we said, was crucial to any successful team, and Geographical and Leadner offered the mechanism to solve the problem in 1999. Which was develop trust in a short time frame, and they called it the swift trust paradigm. And it basically suggests that members assume that the other team members are trustworthy. Like I was saying before, trust by proxy. I'm not sure how much work went into this study, because you would always assume that if people have been brought on the project as an expert, they can probably be trusted to see the project through in an expert and in a professional manner. So, are virtual teams productive? Yes, if they're run well, basically. But there's many sort of pitfalls, like we were talking about, like we've discussed with the definition of tasks, the definition of output, the constant reiteration of tasks, and the constant reiteration of individual output is very, very important in those teams. We've literally, and we've just touched on all of these things, so the strategy and goal setting, developing a good brief, talking about your outputs, developing a shared language is quite important, you know, just because of cultural differences and differences in different countries. The team building and cohesiveness, we've talked about communication, the coordination and commitment, you know, your dodgy phone lines, we don't want any other signal dropping at any time, and then the appropriate task technology fit. So if you're starting up a Skype call, or you're on a virtual team, it's very simple, but just make sure you've got a webcam, you know, don't spend the whole time. You'll find yourself being the one who's missing out, because you can't tell if people are being genuine with you, because you're just ringing up on a phone, or you're logging into Skype via voice. Advantages of global teams, and this was something that was really apparent in most of the projects that we've worked on, is that you can pretty much, probably the most important one here, is the follow the sun approach, which, as long as your team's organised enough and has the organisation to set specific tasks constantly check up on those specific tasks, and check in with each other and say task complete and move on to the next task, the follow the sun approach pretty much effectively doubles the speed of the project. Because while you're logging off at 7 o'clock at night in England, they'll be working for another 4 or 5 hours in America. And if you can get the organisation of your virtual team flowing, and you can basically give people tasks regularly enough and check on those tasks regularly enough, and have a shared understanding that, you know, we're trying to complete this in a very, very short time frame. I'll check in with you in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time, as you're going to bed, and we'll pass over the task. So, and we'll pass over the task. And if you do it that way, and you do the follow the sun approach, I mean, it works beautifully. It's absolutely fantastic, because you're literally waking up and what you were discussing before you went to bed has been done. But that does rely on developing quite a strong virtual team with you know, that extra level of trust between the people in the team. You know, we've touched on knowledge transfer, world-class expertise. Increased access to information is a pretty good one. You know, because everything's on a shared drive, or because everything's on Dropbox or a SkyDrive, you at any time of day can check those documents. I mean, with the current state of technology, you could use your phone. No matter where you are, you're always going to know at what point that project's at. Okay.
Who will update? Which is all on access to this virtual program.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the SkyDrive and the social media sites. I mean, we all know about those. But the SkyDrive and the Dropbox. You can start a project on Dropbox. You can invite people to it, and at any one time. I mean, you can now post documents to Facebook as well. So, whichever one it is, you can all post documents to it, and you'll all get a notification when documents have been posted to it. Or if you use something like Google Docs, you can all work on one single document, and once somebody's made amendments to that document, it'll inform you via your phone that there's amendments been made, or via email that amendments have been made to that document, so you can go straight online and check them out. I mean, effectively, it's a little bit like having two jobs. When I've worked on virtual teams, it's pretty tiring. You know, you come here, you do your job here, you work all day, and people forget that a virtual team is pretty much 24/7. And if there's a problem, sometimes people forget about that, or people want to be in touch with you as soon as they deem it acceptable to be in touch with you. So getting a phone call from Saudi Arabia at 5 o'clock in the morning is pretty normal, because they deem it acceptable to ring you at 5 o'clock in the morning, because they think, well, you know, you'll be up. You know, that's happened quite a few times to me, and you find yourself being at work all day, and because you've got to hit the time frame in the window, you'll be on a Skype call at 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night, just because that, as far as the geographic displacement of time zones works, that's the best time for the whole group to be together. So it's definitely a tiring thing to do, and I wouldn't do it on a rolling basis. You know, if you work on a virtual team project, do it for a month, do it for 2 months, and then make sure you haven't got another one coming up for another couple of months. Otherwise, if it's more of a long-term scenario for your business or for the business that you're in, you know, you need to take a better look at how to allocate people's working hours. Do people get paid overtime for these meetings? You know, that sort of understanding. You know. So, well, there's no commute time. That's another thing as well, which is pretty cool. So if you have got a day off and there's people trying to get hold of you, all you need is your phone these days, or you know, your laptop at hand to be in touch with people. Disadvantages are very, very similar in some ways to the advantages, because it's a double-edged sword, really. The fact that there's increased access to every team member, and that you can get hold of somebody anytime you want, is also a bad thing, like I've just mentioned, because someone can get hold of you at any time they want. And somebody could upload a document that you said you've been waiting for 3 days, you know, email you at like 1:30 at night, which is their lunchtime, and say, oh, the document's finished, I know it's got to be in tomorrow, your end, and you're thinking, well, that's great, it's 1:30 in the morning, you know, and we're going to get up at 6 and work on it for 3 hours before I go into work, just so it's finished that morning. So you need to be sensitive to other people's time constraints. I've found the best way to do this is to have a sort of a running diary of the countries that I'm working with for their time frames, you know, just on my desk or on my wall, so that I always know whatever time it is that I'm working on, where the rest of my team is globally. You know, if it's got to be in America on Wednesday afternoon, what time have I got to get everybody else in their own time zones to finish their project or their elements of the project to make sure that it's in at noon on Wednesday in America. So the organisation level to run a successful virtual team is quite a bit higher than running a normal team, if you're going to do it well. Inconsistent access can be quite an issue. Apart from those people who like to fake the connectivity issues, some of these technologies like Skype do crash quite regularly, and in the beginning, when everybody's getting used to it, especially if you've got new members to the virtual team, you've kind of just got to go along with it and understand, and have a little bit of a teething period of a few meetings before everybody gets to grips with the technology. And bear in mind that if you're quite tech savvy, there might not be people in the team that are the same, especially if they're experts, in another field completely unrelated. More personal flexibility, that kind of leads to the fact that you haven't got any free time. I can't go and play five-a-side football on an evening. You can't do this, you can't do that, because you have to be available. If there's a meeting going on, you've got to be there, otherwise the team basically wastes a week's worth of meeting. You need to know what the update is. We have in past offered recordings. We recorded the meeting and said, the meeting's available, but then that kind of ends up a little bit like when you're a student and there's going to be a handout, so you're sort of like, will you get us the handout? You just think, well, I don't need to be there, do I? I can get the handout. And it works the same sort of process when you do a recording of the meeting, is that maybe one week you'll find that somebody misses it and they want the recording, and then the second week, unfortunately they miss it again, and the team does disintegrate if that contact isn't kept up. Something that's quite difficult to deal with, is poor leadership. If you're not the leader of a project and you're just a piece of this team, the bit that you really need to sort of get a hold of as soon as possible is the development of that brief and the individual outputs being outlined as soon as possible. So you're effectively removing the leadership from the leader to a certain degree by having it defined in concrete terms what everybody needs to do to make this project a success. So that even if the leader's failing to keep people in check and to keep the work coming in, as a team member, and you've all agreed to this schedule, you've all agreed to this time frame, this design brief, you can look back at that and say, look, we're massively behind, I'm just concerned, so you're not causing friction with the leader of the team, but you can always refer to that brief and use it for yourself, and those outputs and the tasks defined, you can use that to push the project forward. And that works the same with incompetent team members as well. Because as much as people try to appoint people who are trustworthy and who are experts in the field, just because you're an expert in your field doesn't mean that you're not incompetent. So it's much easier when you're in a working environment to sort of go and have a little word with somebody on the side and just give them a nudge and say, how are you getting on with that? They can tell by the tone of your voice, and you sort of think, well, is he saying I'm not doing enough? And how's it going? Do I need to get you any more help? Those sort of little prompts that happen if you're behind on a day-to-day basis at work aren't there in a virtual team. So it's a lot harder to get a grasp of people in the virtual team who aren't pulling their own weight. And that falls back as well to having a clearly defined project plan. And within that project plan, having clearly defined outputs. So you can always refer back to that and just say, look, James, why haven't you given me this? And we need it. And when you out somebody in a virtual team for not working, it's kind of on a big, it's on the social scale, isn't it? So everybody sees it, which that creates a little bit of friction as well, but it's kind of the only way you can do things. So I think this is the end of the presentation. So any questions?
Who normally becomes the spokesperson or the leader of the team? Is it the client, or is it these take turns?
Well, the teams that I've worked on have more been project teams to actually work for a commercial company to get to an end goal. So they haven't actually been dealing with a client. I wouldn't want to work. Well, they have been dealing with a client, i.e., a commercial company, but in a design sense, they haven't been dealing with a client. I think dealing with a client in a virtual team would probably be a very, very difficult social dynamic. Just because you really want somebody. I'm not saying that clients aren't informed, but you really want somebody who's informed on delivering the project rather than somebody who's just got desired outputs. I mean, you'll often find, probably know it yourself, working with clients, in the sort of person sense of the term, they'll change the project, they'll want this doing, they'll want that doing, things will move. It's much better in a virtual team if they've kind of got a spokesperson or somebody that they can go through. Because you can't, yourself, you can't say things in front of clients as well, you've got to just say, look, it's unrealistic, sometimes it's ridiculous. This is the way the project was set out in the beginning, we've got to carry on down this road.
I'm just thinking of, say, a medium to large construction project. There'd be that many stakeholders involved in that, and that probably would be impossible to have a structured virtual meeting.
Yeah. But I mean, in that case, you'd run it as a lot of satellite virtual teams. So you've probably got your own team for one area of the project. But I know what you're saying. If you were going to try and run that, it would take higher organisation skills to run your own team like that. It takes even higher organisational skills to sort of run your team alongside another virtual team, alongside another virtual team.
So we're basically just getting information off that group,
yeah.
nominate.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. Work in your group, have a spokesperson in your group, complete your task in a group. So do that as like a micro task, and then the best communicator in that group, or the person with the most knowledge, then sits on another virtual team for the project as a whole, and they talk about the delivery of their deliverables and basically how they're getting on with the project, how it's going. But yeah, have as many people, keep it lean basically. Only have the people that you need in any one meeting at any one time. If you don't need people in that meeting, don't exclude them. Just make it known, because you can publish an agenda of meetings, the reason for the meeting, and who attends that meeting in a huge thing, and send that out to everybody in the team. But it just goes back to that. You just need to be a lot more organised, really, to run that sort of operation. But I suppose the payoff is that effectively you could be working around the clock. So you get 2 days for every one.
Have you been involved in any that's just after a while failed?
I've been involved in a couple that have looked like they're going to fail. They haven't failed in the end, because I think innately the people who are trusted to come to the team as an expert, regardless of how incompetent they may be, they've managed to do enough work in life to get to the position where they're an expert, so they're never going to let the project completely fail. Granted, it might be, you might think, well, actually, you completed the project, but it was a little bit rubbish. But you kind of just got to put those things down to, that's what happened. And when that has happened, I've gone through the communications and I've gone through the project, and I think a really useful exercise is just to reflect on the whole process, and think about it. And when I spoke to Ian about doing this sort of talk with you guys the last year when I did it, when I sat down and reflected on the processes that I'd gone through in virtual teams, I realised that some of my actions were I'm quite impatient as a person. I don't like to be sat there for 2 hours talking about something new. I'll talk about my bit and then we'll be gone, and I'll take the information I need and carry on with the job just to get on with it. But you've just got to be a bit more patient with people. be a bit more understanding that there's different personality types, and everything's kind of amplified that little bit more when you're working in a like a professional global virtual team.
What about transactions of payments? Do you just take it on face value that whatever somebody's telling you in a Skype is justified, and there you go, and there's a box payment on its way? You know?
So you
see, I've done that. My milestones complete, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Pay me. All right, okay, and you tap that as absolute, and
well, on
you
the
find
projects,
out that he hasn't really been truthful.
well, on the projects I've been involved with, you usually send off you know, whoever's employing you, or if you're going in as self-employed, you send them a contract before it kicks off. Get them to sign the contract and email it back to you, or you know, get the email copy straight away, and tell them to put the other copy in the post at the beginning of the project, or some form of memorandum of understanding about when the project's delivered, you'll be paid in full. This is outline all those things at the beginning before any sort of lengthy Skype meetings have taken place. That sort of stuff to me usually starts in via email. Do you want to be part of this team? These are the terms and conditions. This is the you send them back. You say, oh, this is my day rate. This is that. This is this.
Have you ever picked up the phone after you've been speaking to somebody on the Skype and just went, hey, I've just had a Skype meeting, and it's just right, the lads told us this and that, what's happened on the job, and that, has it been completed? So you virtually went round them.
Well, I virtually went like virtual subversion of the virtual team.
Yeah, and oh yeah, it's been done. Okay, cheers, mate, thanks very much.
Well, I think the most of the projects I've been involved with haven't been as large scale as the ones you're talking about. So the people that I'm working with are individually responsible for producing their end of the deal. There's only been one or two team members I've worked with who have been in charge of a team that's responsible for delivering it. And I haven't rang their sort of teams to check. I think that goes down to that sort of Swift trust paradigm. Before, again, you've just sort of got to take it on face value that they've done it.
If somebody's pulling the cord every fortnight and you can see on the face,
and then you just and I mean that's when it definitely falls back to your outputs and your project plan and your schedule of work that you've wanted to come in, and you've had to say, look, this should have been done. Look, everybody's got this. And I suppose another thing about virtual teams is that everybody's got the same amount of accountability. You have no reason to say that you never got an email, or that you were never told, or that you never saw the document. Because if you're getting updated via Facebook, Skype, Twitter, basically every form that the group's linked to, you should know what's going on in that project, regardless of whether it's your bit of the project at every second of the day, or whenever there's an update. Because if you haven't got there's no excuse for you not seeing the document, other than being incompetent yourself. You sort of like, you've got to check, and that adds more work to your time, because in a normal day-to-day basis, you just expect that people are doing the job. Anyway, you just think, well, he's got that on the go, but it kind of puts more accountability on yourself, because you've got to check the documents that have been uploaded and say, all right, have a quick look. Well, that seems all right, because they could just turn around and say, well, look, the document's been up there for like the last 3 weeks. You should have checked it. You knew what I was going to do. We've had a discussion about it. But once again, everything's recorded. You record your meetings anyway, just for purposes of sort of liability, and then you can go back through them, and it does. I mean, it could get a bit messy if there were any major decisions that went wrong. But
have you come across any issues where for like their standardisation, like whether you've all got the same software packages or stuff like that?
Definitely. There's been times when I've issued documents like Photoshop documents, and people haven't had Photoshop on their computer to use it, or people don't have AutoCAD, they might use MicroStation, and things like that. And usually those creases are ironed out at the beginning. The first couple of weeks or the first week, you sort of think, well, if I can't send them an AutoCAD file, I'll just plot it, or I'll send it as a DXF or a DWG and send it through to like that, and he can open it in his own package. you kind of work out what the standard file format for each exchange would be, but that goes differently for everybody. You know, instead of sending a PSD file, I'd send a PDF, and let them mark it up and give them my feedback.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, around trust on it. I mean, there's this argument, isn't there, in the literature that old people like me find it a lot harder with virtual teams.
I wasn't going to touch on that.
And the trust issue perhaps is there for us, whereas the younger people who's been used to Skype and all of these different ways, it's almost like the trust is partially there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh no, completely. I think it'll change, obviously, because there won't be as many older people in the business. But the no worries, Ian. But you do get people that just generally don't like technology, and I think that's more down to a bad choice of team member, to be honest. You know, I'm not holding it against them, but if somebody doesn't like being on the computer, putting them in a virtual team is probably a mistake. And they do, you know, they don't really partake in the team as much, and somebody who just isn't bothered is as much damage as somebody who's incompetent and who can't do the job, because they'll tend to not upload documents when they say they're going to upload them, just because they can't be bothered to sit there for 4 hours and figure it out. You know, it says upload, mate. There's a button that says upload. It's all you've got to press, and then drag the image over. It's done. It takes 4 minutes, if that. You know, you do get people who are just quite stuck in their ways and don't want to carry on and upload things. And they're the kind of people who have, you know, the telecommunication issues of pulling the line and, I couldn't get through to you, sending you an email because they've literally just got used to emails, and saying, I couldn't manage to get it working tonight, I'll just catch the video. So yeah, you do get issues with that.
But perhaps if they engage, I mean, they perhaps need more face contact than say what you would need. Would you agree with that? In other words, the trust is negated.
Yeah. I mean, if you find yourself on a virtual team with somebody who has the expertise but isn't really pulling their weight, and you sense that it's because they're not up to grips with the software, or you know, they don't really like it, they're not comfortable with Skype. The best way I've found to do it is to be more friendly about the whole situation, and just give them a ring, like, you know, on Skype during the week or something, and just have a chat, just to catch up with them. And as soon as they see it, as soon as it becomes to them what it is to younger people, which is more of a social tool, you know, and a more of a social means of communication, it slowly seeps in, and they just get used to logging on and having a business meeting like that. But yeah, it's one of those things, if you bother to put the time in, you give them a ring and you have a bit of chat with them. And I suppose, like, if you were part of any well-functioning team, if one of your members was feeling a bit down and couldn't be bothered, you'd take them to one side, or you'd go and sit with them at lunch or something and just say, "You're all right, mate, you know, what's anything I can do to make things easier?" You know, it's a similar dynamic, team dynamic with virtual teams.
Thanks. Is there anyone? Yeah.
Have you done much consideration to personal cultures, how that impact virtual teams? So say Americans versus Europeans?
Yeah, well there is, yeah. There's one or two Americans that I worked with who are, everything's brilliant and super positive and like mega enthusiastic about everything. And I don't mean in general, there's only a couple of people that I've worked with that have been like that. But those kind of people, I suppose, are equally difficult to deal with in real life, because you never quite get to the bottom of things. You never quite like, look, is it a good idea? Oh, it's brilliant. And you're like, well, no, but is it a good idea? And I'm like, do you know what I'm talking about? Have you looked at it? Have you read the document? Because I personally think it's a little bit rubbish, and I'm trying to find out no, I'm sure it'll be fine, it's great. And you're like, okay. So then you go and ask like the German member of the team, who will tell you straight out, like, you know, work with a couple of German chaps, and you know, stereotypes kind of hold true, to be honest with you, because you just get everything bang on time, Like I'll wake up at like 7 or something, and there'll be like 30 different documents just there, and it's almost as if they haven't been uploaded at 6:59 or 7 o'clock. They've literally come through as I've woke up at 7, and they're there, ready to be checked, ready to be gone through. So I've found that the sort of stereotypes have, so far in the virtual teams that I've worked with, that have been quite far-ranging. You know, have worked quite well, but as well, you know, some cultures are quite loud. You know, they're quite. Like I worked with a South African guy before, and you know, he was just really, really to the point, and because the accent's quite curt, you sort of think, who are you shouting at? when you're when you're in the meeting. But you just got to kind of get over the fact and realise, actually, you know, you're working in a global environment, you're working in a global team. There's loads of people, everybody's got different accents, everybody's got different cultures and different ways of working. And, you know, 1, don't be offended too easily. 2, don't laugh too quickly. Because sometimes it might not be a joke. And you know, just take things a bit easy and just see as you go, as you feel your way through your new team. Pretty much like if anybody started at a job, you know, you would in real life. So there's a chap over there.
Have you ever worked with escrow in terms of handling payments, where sort of middleman handles the payments while the stage is complete?
No,
Like the trust-
not on the job, not on the virtual teams that I've worked with. I could imagine that would be quite a good way of doing it, as long as you were happy to lose part of that payment to the middleman.
We've done that.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know anything about the company.
Yeah.
So we couldn't trust that they were
That you'd get
big enough company.
Yeah, I think that's a really good solution, definitely, and one that's quite easily set up over virtual teams as well.
Could you explain a little bit more about the mechanics, very simply?
Well, we work with a company in the States, and we knew nothing about them. We were a 10-man team, but we were experts in our field. So, because we didn't know anything about them, we hadn't been on site, we hadn't seen them face to face. You know, there was email contact via the website, so the trust bond hadn't been established. So we decided to use an escrow service to handle the stages. So we had the payments split between 4 stages of project, and each payment was made to the escrow service on completion of every stage.
Yeah.
So they held, the payments were made to the escrow service prior to the stage beginning, and on completion it was then paid to the provider who did the work.
Right.
So it was a matter of, it formed that trust bond that everyone knew they were going to get paid if the work was done.
Yeah.
Which was quite
So you're sort of outsourcing your trust.
yeah, basically, yeah. Until we can definitely clarify the work, and then after that we just did direct payment.
Yeah. It is a good solution.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Anybody else have any further questions?
Right, thanks ever so. Sorry.
Mr. General, did you do any research on this regarding culture and virtual teams, or is that your own experience?
That's just my own experience with culture and virtual teams. I wouldn't be so bold as to sort of blanket statement stereotypes apply in virtual teams and put that out there. In my own experience, it's been that way. There's a ridiculous wealth of research information and papers on virtual teams. So, I mean, if you are interested in virtual teams, a quick search on Google Scholar will bring up probably more than you can handle all at once, because there's hundreds and hundreds of people and papers looking into this. I think it's important when you're doing research in that area as well to, you know, although obviously pay attention to the work that's gone on in the past. Virtual teams, like work with virtual environments, can become quite obsolete if it's old, just because the methods have changed. You know, it's a whole different landscape now than it was 5 years ago. So just be aware of that when you look at it.
Is there any perks for you personally? Do you get invited to fly anywhere? Do you get free?
I'm quite lucky. You know, I've been to Las Vegas and to cocktail parties in Monaco and stuff like that, and I've had a decent time. You know.
Well, you might know. I can see it happening a lot.
But it's one of the things that when you like making any contact, it'll pay off if you do a good job of making that contact and you have a good working relationship. And my closest working contacts have probably become some of my good friends. You know, I make a lot of effort sort of socially and professionally to keep in touch with them and to carry on working together and do projects together. But on the other hand, that takes takes its toll.
Yeah.
That it takes an effort just to be there,
You mentioned
in touch.
professional organisations, you know, the likes of Rix and the CIOB and that. Are they heavily involved in these, or are they promoting this sort of stuff?
I haven't had any dealings with with any
Just
sort of
definitely
professional
not.
body
Yeah.
as far as virtual teams goes in that way.
Can we call that it? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks ever so much, Ollie.
No worries.
That was absolutely brilliant. Hang on, mate, I'll just switch this off.